The town of Silverwood had always been quiet, the kind of place where people smiled at each other on the street, where the biggest drama was an argument over property lines or a teenager sneaking out past curfew. But on a chilly October morning, the peace was shattered by the screams of a man in unbearable pain. Detective Michael Grayson had been with the Silverwood Police Department for nearly 20 years. He had seen a lot: murders, disappearances, even a serial killer once. But this case would be unlike anything he had ever investigated. The call had come in around 2:45 a.m. A man was found in his own bedroom, bleeding out, screaming, barely conscious. When the paramedics arrived, they realized the unimaginable. Someone had cut off his testicles. And it wasn't just any someone, it was his wife. Ava and Daniel Carter were the couple everyone admired. They were wealthy, attractive, and deeply in love, or so it seemed. Ava was a real estate agent with a sharp mind and an even sharper temper when provoked. Daniel was a fitness coach known for his charm and good looks. Their marriage was not ordinary. For the past 2 years, they had been in an open relationship. It had started as Daniel's idea, but Ava had agreed, pretending to be fine with it. Secretly, she hated it. She watched as Daniel entertained different women, always promising that it didn't mean anything. "It's just fun, Ava," he would say. "You're my wife. You're the only one that matters." Ava tried to move on. She even entertained a few men herself. But deep down, she resented Daniel for suggesting it in the first place. Everything changed when she found out about Melissa Green. Unlike the other women, Melissa wasn't just a fling. Daniel had been seeing her in secret for months, even breaking the rules of their open relationship. Ava discovered the truth through a simple mistake. Daniel had left his phone unlocked while in the shower. A message popped up. "Melissa, I can't wait to see you again, baby. I love you." Ava's hands trembled as she scrolled through the messages. He had taken Melissa to the same places they used to go. He had called her the same pet names. And the worst part, he had promised Melissa that he would leave Ava soon. Her heart turned. "Say, you're my wife. You're the only one that matters." Ava tried to move on. She even entertained a few men herself. But deep down, she resented Daniel for suggesting it in the first place. Everything changed when she found out about Melissa Green. Unlike the other women, Melissa wasn't just a fling. Daniel had been seeing her in secret for months, even breaking the rules of their open relationship. Ava discovered the truth through a simple mistake. Daniel had left his phone unlocked while in the shower. A message popped up. "Melissa, I can't wait to see you again, baby. I love you." Ava's hands trembled as she scrolled through the messages. He had taken Melissa to the same places they used to go. He had called her the same pet names. And the worst part, he had promised Melissa that he would leave Ava soon. Her heart turned to ice. The night of the attack, Ava played her part well. She didn't let Daniel see her anger. Instead, she cooked him his favorite dinner, laughed at his jokes, and even poured him a drink. She seduced him, leading him to their bedroom, making sure he had no suspicions. And when the moment was right, she struck. No one heard his screams at first. Their house was large, set far from the nearest neighbors. By the time Daniel collapsed on the bed, clutching his groin, blood pooling beneath him, Ava was already standing over him, breathing heavily, her hands stained red. "You think you can humiliate me?" she whispered, her voice calm. "You think I'll just sit back while you replace me?" Daniel could barely respond. He tried to reach for his phone, but Ava simply kicked it away. She watched him suffer, expression unreadable, before finally calling 911. She told the dispatcher, in a perfectly steady voice, "My husband had an accident. He's bleeding badly, so please send help." By the time the paramedics arrived, Ava was sitting beside Daniel, stroking his hair, whispering apologies. She looked like the perfect, worried wife, but Detective Michael Grayson wasn't so easily fooled. As Daniel was rushed to the hospital, Michael studied Ava's face. Something wasn't right, and he was going to find out what. Detective Michael Grayson arrived at the Carters' home just after dawn. The house was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that only comes after something horrific has happened. The front door was slightly ajar, as if inviting him inside. He stepped over the threshold, taking in the crime scene. The bedroom was a mess. Blood had soaked through the pristine white sheets, dripping onto the hardwood floor. The scent of iron lingered in the air. Grayson had seen some gruesome things in his career, but this was personal, intimate. Someone hadn't just wanted to hurt Daniel Carter. They wanted to take away his power. Ava Carter sat in the living room, wrapped in a soft gray blanket, her eyes distant. She had changed into fresh clothes, but there were still faint traces of blood under her fingernails. A steaming cup of tea sat untouched on the table in front of her. Grayson studied her for a moment before sitting across from her. "Ava, I'm Detective Grayson. I know tonight was traumatic, but I need to ask you some questions," he said, his voice calm but firm. Ava nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. "Of course." Grayson pulled out his notepad. "Tell me what happened." Ava took a deep breath. We were having a normal night. I made dinner, we talked, we went to bed, and then—" She hesitated, her fingers tightening around the edge of the blanket. "Something went wrong." "What do you mean?" Grayson pressed. Ava's lower lip trembled, but no tears came. "Daniel, he suddenly screamed in pain. I didn't know what was happening. There was blood everywhere. I panicked and called 911. Grayson raised an eyebrow. He had questioned hundreds of people before, and he knew when someone was lying. "There was no intruder?" he asked. "No," Ava whispered. "You were the only one with him?" "Yes." Grayson nodded slowly, jotting down notes. "Ava, I need to ask something difficult. Your husband was found with severe injuries to his groin. This wasn't an accident. Someone did this to him." "Was it you?" Ava's eyes widened. "What? No! How could you even think that?" Grayson leaned back in his chair, watching her carefully. "Because you were the only person here. Because this wasn't random. This was revenge." Ava flinched, just for a second, but Grayson caught it. "Were you angry at Daniel?" he asked. She swallowed hard. We had problems like any couple, but I loved him." "Did you know he was seeing someone else?" Ava stiffened, and there it was. The other woman. While Grayson questioned Ava, Officer Sarah Martinez was making a visit of her own. Daniel Carter wasn't just another cheating husband. He had been involved in a long-term affair, and the woman at the center of it all was Melissa Green. Melissa lived in a high-rise apartment in downtown Silverwood, a sharp contrast to the suburban comfort of the Carters' home. She opened the door cautiously when Martinez knocked. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her hair messy. It was clear she had been crying. "Miss Green?" Martinez asked. Melissa nodded. "Yes. What is this about?" "I need to talk to you about Daniel Carter." At the mention of his name, Melissa's face crumpled. "Is he okay?" Martinez hesitated. "He's in critical condition." Melissa covered her mouth, gasping. "Oh my God!" Martinez studied her reaction. Genuine shock, which meant she hadn't known yet. "Melissa, how long have you been seeing Daniel?" Melissa wiped her eyes, sniffling. "About a year. And were you aware that he was married?" Melissa hesitated before nodding. "He told me he and Ava had an open marriage. He said she didn't care." Martinez tilted her head. "Did she know about you?" Melissa hesitated again, then shook her head. "Daniel said he hadn't told her yet, but he was going to. He was planning to leave her. We were supposed to be together." Martinez scribbled something in her notes. "Do you have any idea who might have wanted to hurt him?" Melissa looked down, silent for a long moment. Then in a small voice she said, "Ava." Back at the station, Grayson and Martinez sat in the interrogation room, reviewing their notes. "She's lying," Grayson said, tossing his notepad onto the table. "She's covering something up." Martinez nodded. "Melissa Green confirmed the affair. She says Daniel was planning to leave Ava." "That's a strong motive." Grayson exhaled. "Ava said it was an accident, but the way Daniel was injured, that was no accident. It was personal, and she was the only one there." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the case pressing down on them. Finally, Martinez broke the silence. "We need to check Ava's phone records. If she knew about Melissa before this happened, then this wasn't a crime of passion. It was premeditated." Grayson nodded. "And we need to talk to Daniel." If he survives, he might be the only one who can tell us exactly what happened. They didn't have enough for an arrest yet, but the walls were closing in on Ava Carter, and she knew it. Detective Michael Grayson leaned back in his chair, watching Ava Carter across the table. They had moved her from her house to the police station, where the sterile walls and harsh lighting made it harder to hide behind emotion. Ava sat with her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. She was composed, but Grayson knew better. Underneath, she was unraveling. "You lied to me, Ava," he said, setting a file down on the table. "I told you everything I know," Ava replied, her voice flat. Grayson slid a piece of paper toward her. "This is a record of your recent calls. 2 days before the incident, you called Melissa Green. Not once, but 3 times. Do you want to explain that?" Ava's lips parted slightly, but she quickly closed them. Grayson pressed on. "You told me you didn't know about the affair, but you did. You found out, and you called her." He leaned forward. "What did you talk about, Ava?" Ava exhaled sharply. "I confronted her. I needed to hear it from her. And she told me everything." "Everything? Like Daniel was going to leave you?" Ava flinched. Grayson nodded. "That's what I thought." He tapped his pen against the table. "So, after you found out your husband was planning to leave you for another woman, 2 days later, he ends up mutilated in his own bed. That's quite a coincidence, don't you think?" Ava clenched her jaw. "I didn't do anything to him." Grayson leaned back. "Then tell me what really happened." Ava hesitated before speaking. "That night, Daniel and we were together. It was normal at first, but then I confronted him about Melissa." She bit her lip. "He didn't deny it. He just looked at me like he didn't care." "What did he say?" Grayson asked. "That she was younger, more exciting, that he was done pretending our marriage meant something." Ava swallowed hard. "He told me I should be grateful he stayed this long." Grayson studied her. "And that made you angry?" Ava's hands trembled slightly. "Of course it did." "Did you attack him?" "No," she snapped. I wanted him to feel the pain I felt." Grayson tilted his head. "What does that mean, Ava?" Ava looked away. "I don't remember." Grayson sighed. "That's not going to work, Ava." While Grayson questioned Ava, Officer Sarah Martinez was reviewing Daniel Carter's medical report. She frowned as she scanned the details. The injuries were deliberate. There was no way they were caused by an accident. But what caught her attention was something else entirely. A toxicology report showed traces of a sedative in Daniel's bloodstream. Martinez immediately picked up the phone and called Grayson. Grayson walked back into the interrogation room, his phone still in his hand. "Ava, you said you don't remember what happened that night. Maybe this will help jog your memory." He placed a copy of the toxicology report in front of her. Ava's eyes darted to the paper. Grayson folded his arms. "Daniel was drugged. That means whatever happened, he wasn't fully conscious. You had the upper hand." Ava's breath hitched. I didn't." Grayson leaned in. "You did, Ava. You gave him something. And then when he was weak, you took your revenge." Ava's composure finally cracked. Tears welled up in her eyes and her breathing grew uneven. "I just wanted him to feel the pain I felt," she whispered. Grayson nodded slowly. "So you drugged him. And when he was helpless, you—" Ava covered her mouth, her shoulders shaking. "I didn't mean to do it like that. I lost control." Grayson let the silence stretch between them. Then he said, "Tell me everything, Ava." And finally she did. Ava Carter sat in the interrogation room, her hands trembling as she wiped her tear-streaked face. Detective Michael Grayson sat across from her, his expression unreadable. He had seen this before, the moment when a suspect could no longer hold in the truth. "Start from the beginning," Grayson said, his voice calm but firm. Ava took a shaky breath. "That night, I had already made up my mind. After my conversation with Melissa, I couldn't stop thinking about it, about how he humiliated me, lied to me, made me feel like I was nothing. He was planning to leave me, Detective, after everything I gave to that man." Grayson let her talk, taking mental notes. "And then? I bought the sedative that morning," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "A mild one. Just enough to make him weak, not knock him out completely." I needed him to feel what it was like to be powerless. Grayson exchanged a glance with Officer Sarah Martinez, who stood near the door, arms crossed. They had suspected this, but hearing Ava admit it confirmed their theory. "How did you give it to him?" Grayson asked. Ava sniffled. "I made his favorite drink, whiskey with honey. He never suspected anything. He drank it all, and within minutes he started feeling dizzy. He kept asking what was wrong with him, but I just told him to relax." Grayson's pen hovered over his notepad. "And then," Ava looked down at the table, "we went to bed, but I wasn't going to let him get away with it." Ava's voice became eerily detached as she continued. "He was lying there, barely able to move. I could see it in his eyes, confusion, maybe even fear, but I didn't care. I straddled him like I had so many times before. But this time, I had something in my hand." Grayson shifted in his seat. "A knife?" Ava nodded. "A small one of my kitchen knives. I didn't want to kill him. I just wanted to take away the one thing that made him feel powerful, the thing he used to betray me." Martinez grimaced but said nothing. Ava swallowed hard. "I did it quickly. He screamed, but his body was too weak to fight back. I remember the blood, so much blood. I grabbed a towel, tried to stop it, but it was everywhere." Grayson tapped his pen against the table. "And after," "I panicked," Ava admitted. "I didn't think he would pass out so fast. I just sat there watching him, holding the towel against him. But he wasn't responding. I thought he was dead." "But he wasn't." Ava shook her head. I called 911 eventually. Told them I found him like that. By the time they arrived, he was unconscious but still breathing." Grayson exhaled. "So you left him there bleeding out until you were sure he couldn't tell anyone what happened?" Ava looked up, her face pale. "I didn't mean for it to go that far. I wanted him to suffer." Martinez handed Grayson the full medical report. "Doctors said he nearly died from blood loss," Martinez said. "But he'll survive. And when he wakes up, he'll be able to confirm everything." Grayson nodded. "Then we charge her with attempted murder." Ava's head snapped up. "No, I didn't try to kill him." Grayson's expression hardened. "You left him to die, Ava. That's the same thing." Tears streamed down Ava's face, but Grayson felt no sympathy. She had planned it, carried it out, and only regretted it once she realized she might not get away with it. "Officer Martinez," Grayson said. "Read her rights." As Martinez stepped forward, Ava let out a quiet sob. The bloody truth was out now. There was no turning back. The hospital room was quiet except for the steady beep of the heart monitor. Jackson Carter lay in bed, pale and weak, his lower body covered with thick bandages. His breathing was slow, his face gaunt from the blood loss. Detective Michael Grayson stood beside him, flipping through his notepad. Officer Sarah Martinez stood near the door, keeping an eye on the nurses outside. Grayson pulled up a chair. "Mr. Carter, I know you're in pain, but we need to talk." Jackson's eyes flickered open, dull and unfocused. His lips were dry, and when he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "She did this to me." Grayson nodded. "We know. Ava confessed, but we need details from you. Tell us exactly what happened that night." Jackson took a shaky breath, his mind drifting back to that horrifying moment. "I remember coming home late," Jackson started. "I had just dropped Melissa off. Ava was waiting for me, acting normal, too normal. She kissed me, asked if I wanted a drink. I should have known something was off, but I was tired, and I wasn't thinking straight." Grayson jotted down notes. "She drugged you?" Jackson gave a weak nod. "Yeah, I felt it almost immediately. My body got heavy, like my limbs weren't working right. I thought I was just exhausted." She led me to the bedroom, helped me onto the bed. His voice grew strained as he relived the memory. "I tried to move, but I couldn't. She climbed on top of me, smiling like nothing was wrong. Then I saw the knife." Martinez shifted uncomfortably, but Grayson kept his gaze locked on Jackson. "What happened next?" "I begged her to stop," Jackson whispered. "Told her I was sorry. She just looked at me and said, 'Not as sorry as you're going to be.' Then she did it." His voice cracked, and for a long moment, no one spoke. "I don't remember much after that," he continued. "I screamed. The pain was unbearable. I must have blacked out because the next thing I knew, I was in the hospital. Grayson leaned forward. Do you think she meant to kill you? Jackson hesitated, his jaw tightening. Number, she wanted me to suffer. She wanted to take away the thing that made me a man. His voice was bitter. And she did. Grayson scribbled a final note before standing. Thank you for your statement. This helps a lot. Jackson let out a humorless laugh. Does it? She already confessed. What else do you need? Grayson exchanged a glance with Martinez. The full picture. She claims it was revenge. You claim she acted out of jealousy and rage. The court will decide which story they believe. Jackson closed his eyes. I just want this nightmare to be over. Grayson nodded. It will be. Soon. Back at the precinct, Ava sat in a holding cell, her hair a mess, her eyes red from crying. She wasn't a killer. At least that's what she kept telling herself. When Grayson entered, she barely looked up. You've been charged with attempted murder and aggravated assault, he informed her. Your lawyer's on the way. Ava let out a bitter laugh. So that's it? My life is over, Grayson sighed. You made a choice, Ava, and now you have to live with the consequences. Ava buried her face in her hands. I just wanted him to feel pain. I didn't want him to die. Grayson studied her for a long moment. Revenge always feels justified until you end up in a jail cell. As he walked away, Ava's sobs echoed through the hallway. The case was almost closed, but there was still one last piece of the puzzle left. Melissa. Because sometimes the person in the shadows had the biggest secrets of all. Detective Michael Grayson leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen against the desk. Something about this case still didn't sit right. Ava had confessed, Jackson had given his statement, and yet a nagging feeling in his gut told him there was more to the story. That's when he decided to pay Melissa Pierce a visit. Melissa was the missing piece, the woman Jackson risked everything for. And in Grayson's experience, mistresses usually knew more than they let on. Melissa's apartment was a sleek, modern space in the heart of the city. She answered the door wearing a silk robe, her dark hair tied in a messy bun. Detective, she said, her voice smooth but cautious. I was expecting you. Grayson raised an eyebrow. Were you? She stepped aside, letting him in. The apartment smelled like expensive perfume and vanilla candles. Ava's in jail, Jackson is in the hospital, and I'm the only one left, she said, pouring herself a glass of wine. It was only a matter of time before you showed up. Grayson pulled out his notepad. Tell me about your relationship with Jackson. Melissa smirked. It wasn't a relationship, it was an escape. For both of us. Jackson loved the thrill of sneaking around. I loved the attention. She took a sip of wine. But he was never going to leave Ava. That much I knew. Did you know she found out about you? Grayson asked. Melissa's lips curled into a smile. Of course. She called me, threatened me. I wasn't scared of her, though. Ava is predictable, emotional. I knew she'd take it out on Jackson, not me. Grayson leaned forward. And yet you didn't warn him? Melissa shrugged. Why would I? He was a liar, detective. He told me he loved me while going home to her every night. He deserved what he got. Grayson narrowed his eyes. Did you know Ava was planning to hurt him? Melissa hesitated, then she laughed softly. I might have given her the idea. Grayson's grip on his pen tightened. Explain. Melissa set her glass down. When she called me that night, she was hysterical, screaming, crying, asking why he chose me over her. I told her the truth. Jackson wasn't special. He was just another man who thought he could have it all. She walked over to the window, staring out at the city lights. And then I said something, offhand. I told her if she really wanted revenge, she should take away the thing that made him a man. Grayson felt his pulse quicken. You planted the idea in her head? Melissa turned to face him, her expression unreadable. I didn't tell her to do it. I just gave her a suggestion. Grayson stood abruptly. That makes you an accessory, Melissa. Melissa's eyes flashed with amusement. Good luck proving that in court, detective. Back at the precinct, Grayson sat with Officer Martinez, reviewing the case. Ava might have been the one who acted, but Melissa was the trigger, Martinez said, shaking her head. Grayson exhaled. Melissa knew exactly what she was doing. She manipulated Ava's emotions, pushed her toward violence, and then sat back to watch it all unfold. Martinez tapped her pen against the desk. But we can't charge her unless Ava admits Melissa influenced her. Grayson nodded. And Ava might be too broken to fight back. The pieces were finally coming together. But before they could close this case for good, there was one last move to make. And that move was Ava's decision. Ava Carter sat alone in the cold, gray interrogation room, her hands cuffed in front of her. The weight of what she had done pressed on her like a heavy stone. She had lost everything, her marriage, her freedom, and possibly her future. Detective Michael Grayson watched her through the one-way mirror, his mind racing. He had one last shot to get the full truth. Taking a deep breath, he pushed open the door and sat across from her. "Ava," he began, his voice calm but firm, "I need to ask you one last question. Did Melissa Pierce encourage you to do this?" Ava's tired eyes flickered with something. Recognition, regret, maybe even anger. She exhaled sharply and leaned back in her chair. "Melissa," she said bitterly, "she's the reason I'm here." Grayson leaned forward. "Tell me everything." Ava clenched her fists. "I didn't plan to hurt Jackson like that. I wanted to leave him, make him feel the betrayal I felt. But when I confronted Melissa over the phone, she laughed at me. She said I was weak, that Jackson would never stop cheating, and then she said something that got under my skin." Grayson nodded. "She told you to take away his manhood." Ava's eyes burned with tears. "She made it sound so easy, like I could hurt him the way he hurt me." She looked down at her hands. "I was drunk, I was angry, and I listened to her." Grayson exhaled, closing his notepad. "Ava, Melissa knew exactly what she was doing. She manipulated you into committing this crime." Ava let out a bitter laugh. "And yet, I'm the one in handcuffs." Grayson looked at her seriously. "But you have a chance to change that. If you testify against Melissa, we can charge her as an accessory." Ava studied him for a long time. Finally, she wiped her tears and nodded. "I'll do it." The next morning, Melissa Pierce was enjoying a quiet breakfast at a cafe when two officers approached her table. "Melissa Pierce," one of them asked. She looked up, irritation flashing across her face. "Yes? You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit aggravated assault. You have the right to remain silent." Melissa's face paled. "Wait, what? This is ridiculous." As the officers cuffed her, Detective Grayson stepped forward. "Ava Carter gave a full statement. She told us everything." Melissa's confident smirk wavered. "She's lying." Grayson shook his head. "We'll let the court decide that." As Melissa was led away, she screamed, "She did this!" Not me. But her words didn't matter anymore. Justice had caught up with her. Months later, the trial of Ava. Carter and Melissa Pierce became a media sensation. Ava, with her testimony against Melissa, received a reduced sentence. She was still guilty, but the jury saw her as a woman pushed to the edge. Melissa, on the other hand, was convicted of conspiracy and sentenced to prison. Her manipulation had finally caught up with her. As for Jackson Carter, he survived, but his life was never the same. His physical wounds healed, but his pride never recovered. Detective Grayson closed the case with a heavy heart. No one truly won in a case like this. Love, betrayal, and revenge had destroyed 3 lives. And in the end, justice didn't feel like victory.